So colleagues, it's such a pleasure to see you all here, and there are so many distinguished friends who have found the time to join us this evening that I'm not going to name you all and thank you all individually. I'd just like to say how much we appreciate your ongoing support and generous interest in this project and in the symposium this evening. My name is Iain Haynes. I have the privilege of being the co-I, and I've been fortunate to work with Catrin on the expanded interiors programme since its conception. Is that fair enough to say? And it's been an absolute joy exploring ideas with her. And our growth of her vision has been this symposium. And so it's a great pleasure that we will have both a presentation from Catrin on the work to date, but also we are honoured to be joined this evening by Francesco Sirano from Herculaneum, the director of the park, and someone who has been, I think, especially generous and warmly welcoming to this initiative. And I look forward very much to hear what Francesco will say about some of the very exciting initiatives that Herculaneum continues to drive forward. We're also fortunate to be joined by a panel of colleagues, and we're going to take a leaf, in this respect at least, out of the House of Commons. They are going to move for the cameras later on so that they will be filmed, but four star panellists who are going to be offering their observations from their different professional perspectives on the issue of the interface between contemporary art and archaeology. Judith King, a senior research fellow working on contemporary art in heritage experience. Lindsay Allason-Jones, someone who will be very well known to many of you from her work at Newcastle University in the museum service, but also amongst Lindsay's many hats, work in the Hadrian Art Trust. Iain Watson, whose brief as director of Tyne Archives and Museums brings together responsibility for 3 galleries, many museums, and who has himself a strong background in archaeology. And Mike Collins, Inspector of Ancient Monuments for Hadrian's Wall, who has to deal on a daily basis with the extraordinary challenge of overseeing the protection, appropriate presentation, and advancing the research of one of our most distinctive World Heritage Sites, Hadrian's Wall. So it's a pleasure to welcome those panellists, but now without more ado, just to say the format will be Catrin's kindly going to lead off with observations, and at the end of Catrin's presentation I'll ask if there are any specific brief questions on points of detail there. Next up we will be hearing from Francesco, the same format, and then we will follow with panel discussion. I'd love to hear from you from the floor as well on any points there that attract your interest and attention. So I hand over now to my friend and colleague and inspiration, Catrin, who has driven this marvellous project forward, and who I and many others here are very grateful. Catrin, thank you.
Thank you very much, Iain. Thank you very much, Iain, and a very warm welcome to everyone for being here tonight. It's a real honor and pleasure to have Francesco Sirano here as our key speaker. And I thought to give you a context for the symposium, I will briefly talk about the Expanded Interiors project. It's an AHSC-funded research project here at Newcastle University. And we work in close partnership with the Parco Archeologico di Ercolano, the Herculaneum Conservation Project, and also the Parco Archeologico di Pompeii. It was an amazing privilege to work with these two distinctive and, I have to say, also distinctively different archaeological sites. But how did it start? I was in 2008, I was an Abbey Fellow at the British School of Rome, and Andrew Wallace-Hedrill was the director at the time, and he generously and regularly took interested residents and fellows to these amazing archaeological sites to share his knowledge, but also his love for these sites. And I was very lucky to be on one of those trips, and I wanted to warmly welcome him here as well and thank him. He's in the audience. And it was for me really quite an amazing experience to see these works on site. I knew I would be really interested, but being in these houses and seeing this site, it was kind of almost overwhelming how fresh and how topical these works were. And for me as an artist and as a painter, I was struck how relevant these works are, I think, for contemporary critical spatial practice within fine art. This led on to a series I wanted to show you some fantastic example of the Roman wall paintings, but this led on to a series of exhibitions in different venues, but I kind of felt it's still just scratching the surface, because what interested me was what makes these works so topical, and I kind of realized you had to really look at specific houses, specific paintings, and to really engage with them on a much deeper level to find something out about the works, but also about what they bring to contemporary practice. And I wanted to also extend a warm welcome to Dr. Sophie Hay, who's here tonight, a Roman archaeologist. And I had this exhibition also as out of this interest with Roman wall painting at the BSR, and she came and she was one of the persons who helped to really implement the idea and the possibility that as an artist you could perhaps work on these amazing archaeological sites. So I was clear this needs to be approached in an interdisciplinary way. And so I brought together with Expanded Interiors this fantastic team of archaeologists, Professor Iain Haynes, then Dr. Tia Ravasi, and Alex Turner, who's also our digital technology expert, who's unfortunately ill today, and also a team of artists, and we have Rosie Morris here in the audience, and myself as well. So we worked with these fantastic two sites, very different sites, and also with two very different and unusual houses on each of the sites. At Herculaneum, we worked with the wonderful Casa della Cortile, which has this absolute fantastic dramatic choreography of space and volumes, and which sort of culminates into this amazing reception room. I actually think I switched off. You might see the images better. So, this amazing, for its time, unusually large reception room. It's a house with a very rich history, but also post eruption of Vesuvius. And this is an archival image of Mayuri's antiquarium. Mayuri was an archaeologist and the director of the site who started open-air excavations in 1927. And he opened in the Casa del Cortile in 1956 an antiquarium where he brought together objects from all over the site to talk about the daily life of the ancient Herculaneans. Which is something which we kind of picked up as well in our exhibition. We approached the work through artistic, archaeological, and digital research. Here you see Alex in action in the Casa del Bercotile, 3D scanning the space, which was really important for, on the one hand, to have exact measurements, to study the work, but also to create accurate virtual as well as physical models to then develop the exhibitions. And we also had the fantastic privilege to go in the amazing storerooms at Herculaneum. Here you see the 3D scanning of a really beautiful wooden female statue. It's not quite clear whether it was the portrait, an ancestral portrait, or part of the furniture. But what really drew me in Herculaneum is that richness of visual languages and role and function of statues, and in particular statues of women. And for me, it became relatively quite clear that in Herculaneum that the exhibition should really focus on the objects. And the construction here in one way reflects on the painted architectural structure within the wall paintings. You might see it better on this slide as well, which has actually painted objects incorporated, and they sit astonishingly really very much at the surface, so almost between the sort of painted and real dimensions. And so I wanted to work with the replicas, and we produced technical replicas, but also artistically altered replicas in different materials or change of size. And working with repetition, but also the sort of 3D, 2D repetition, and also a kind of quite iconoclastic approach by cutting in letters into these panels. I show you here a selection of the objects further close up. I was really interested in actually really taking all these objects out of context, to test them, to probe them, to rearrange them, and to see what happens. Now, Herculaneum is, of course, a very particular site. The way it is sort of almost carved out of contemporary Ercolano. It's almost like the belly of Ercolano. And there is a really amazing linking or entanglement of the present, the future, the past, which you never can escape on that site, because you're always aware of all these layers. And that has been really amazing, like also as an artist to work within an archaeological site. Of course, that is the really interesting thing, that also it questions what the artwork is. It questions you yourself within these sort of entanglements of times and locations. But I show you this slide again as well, because for the Parco Archeologico di Ercolano and also the Herculaneum Conservation Project, it has been very important through the setup and the location to really reach out and involve the local communities as well, to give them a sense of ownership of the site. And with expanded interiors, we really also wanted to engage local groups, local communities and regional communities. And so we, alongside and before and alongside the exhibition, we initiated together with our partners a series of workshops here with students from the Accademia di Belle Arti, and also we invited local and regional heritage guides to the site for a talk where we used the replicas as well, the 3D printed replicas, and then also for a day-long workshop where we had and all the workshop, which was really fantastic. We had the opportunity to go with the participants as well in the storerooms and to explore the site, as well as doing really hands-on work ourselves. And also we did work with local teachers, and out of that I created a sort of teaching resource pack and tested that then as well within primary and secondary schools in Ercolano, which all of that has been actually really fantastic experience, and it was really nice to draw these different communities into the project. Our website, I've got that here because it's really interlinked with the learning and teaching material, and we have also lots of information on there about the houses, the sites, the art, and so on. However, back to the sites and on to Pompeii. So expanded interiors happened across 2 sites, and here in Pompeii it was part of the house, the Casa di Cryptoportico, House of the Cryptoporticos, which is also an unusual house. It has these beautiful underground passageway, the Cryptoporticos, which is unusual for townhouses, but also a bathroom complex, a rare bathroom complex. Again, a house with a very rich history, but I will just skip over that. Sorry. And here we worked with very exquisite second-style Roman wall paintings here with this colonnade and the Cryptoporticos with the Trojan frieze, and also, which actually, I mean, through one of the things, through the interdisciplinary research and conversations we had, which was really interesting here, is that we kind of thought that the composition is actually a lot more irregular than you think it would be, and this has caused like really interesting conversations amongst us. But there's also a really beautiful bathroom complex here with more illusionistic architectural spaces playing with open and closed walls, private and public space, and inside outside. Now, again, we scanned the houses for a model of the spaces which we would be using, again, to have really accurate measurements and to look at the wall paintings in a different way. But we also had the wonderful opportunity to go into the storerooms, and for Pompeii, I choose more to look at these incredible face cups, which are very fragile and fresh, but also very human and humorous. And they had something incredibly topical in the way how they reacted. They also kind of, for me, made absolute sense, because in this wonderful Roman wall paintings in the Cryptoporticos, there are these very idiosyncratic, beautiful painted faces of herms. And so for me, it kind of echoed, or there was a dialogue going on there. The exhibition at the Cryptoporticos focused much more on the Roman wall paintings. So I wanted to have 2 very different exhibitions which are closely interlinked. So one installation here really is quite closely in dialogue with the colonnade, the painted opposite colonnade. It's like a composition of a kind of regular rhythm of opened and closed spaces, but it kind of collapses into itself at parts. I was very interested as well in to use color and how different colors kind of change their function and role within the painting, and also how the color sort of works with the pre-given orchestration of the house. Because the beautiful thing in the Cryptoporticos is that all what's still there, the remaining things we see, they were all, I'm pretty sure, done by one workshop. So it's really a scheme which is very thoughtful and yeah, it's again like in the Casa del Cortile, but differently. There's a beautiful orchestration of space. Here the objects within the replicas within this installation were a lot more integrated within wall paintings. The second installation in the cryptoporticus referred to the bathroom complex, which you saw earlier, and I wanted it to be really intense and kind of almost sort of relates to the physicality of your body. So I brought together these very sharply contrasting perspectival angles, which at times it looks like the space is sort of coming at you, or it's kind of enwrapping you. And yeah, so it was on this axis with the other really with a sort of really beautiful bathroom you saw earlier. Okay, so it was 3 installations in 2 houses and 2 sites. They are very different, but also really closely connected. And now I wanted to finish my talk with a little extract, because since 2008, so very early when I kind of got really intrigued by these wall paintings, I started to use fictional conversations as a way to think about why I do think that these works are so relevant for us contemporary practitioners. And so I kind of invited different historical artists, which I thought were very relevant in the discourse of installation art, but also critical spatial practice. And I want to finish with an extract from this conversation. It's a fictional panel discussion between Allason-Jones. Allason-Jones was a Russian avant-garde artist who really wanted to merge art and life in his work. He was politically very active. Then Kurt Schwitters, who was a German artist, and he's probably most famously known by turning his parents' flat into a Märzbau. So he created this ever-growing, ever-changing interior artwork. And I have to say that here at the Hutton, we have one of his fantastic late works, the Märzbau Wall. So if you haven't seen it, I'd strongly recommend to visit the Hutton soon. Anyway, so these 3 artists had a very heated discussion, and they conclude by reflecting each of them what they think is really relevant for contemporary critical spatial practice. So this is Allason-Jones first. I believed in the socialist movement in the USSR, or I did in the beginning at least. I wanted to shape society and pioneer alternative ways for art to merge with or infiltrate life. I believe that the artists of the 21st century need to get together more internationally, develop a bigger alternative vision and visual language. Kurt Schwitters. An alternative approach, yes, but I don't see why bigger and louder is better than small and unpredicted. I believe that today it is more about finding ways of working that resist being appropriated by the mainstream, especially if it is about artists' intervention into architecture. It is about creating spaces that resist being repossessed by either good or bad causes. And maybe these spaces should remain hidden, secret, covert, like those back chambers our Roman wall painters talked about earlier. I welcome ambiguity. Last, but certainly not least, our Roman wall painter, and she is anonymous, unfortunately. and she says, I think that what our Roman practice brings to this discussion is firstly complexity, how art articulated a whole building in a layered yet coherent way, and secondly, a trust and belief in the visual and intellectual capacities of the audience, and a recognition that challenging them is good. To finish with a motto like my male colleagues, complexity, difficulty, and multi-layeredness is the key to the future. Thank you.
Catrin, thank you so very much. And we will be coming back to explore those themes that Catrin has brought out for us. I'm going to ask if there are any particular specific points that colleagues would like to raise from the floor at this stage. Any points of clarification or detail?
Catrin, a lot of your work is about colour.
Sorry, say it
A
again.
lot of your work is about colour. You're seeing the colours of
Yes.
Pompeii and Herculaneum.
Yes, and I love them.
Yes.
Tell us a bit.
Well, are they for you different from the palette you expected? What do they do for you?
Well, I mean,
Because I just love this dialogue on the left.
I mean, I was really struck by the diversity of how paints are used within Roman wall paintings, and how they are used in different rooms, and to choreograph the spaces, but also to work with light. I mean, I should I go back? Very quickly. Let me see if I could get very quickly to the very beginning. Because I must say one of the houses where I think color is used quite amazingly is the Villa di Mystery. And I've noticed, because I mean I've been both sides so often, which is really great because you see it's a sort of changing, how the color changes according, sorry this is a bit slow. But in there, for example, it is really amazing how light also activates the Roman wall paintings at a different time of day. And actually in that photo I have on the Villa Mystery, one can see that, I think, quite beautifully. But I love the way, oops. I mean, actually, while I'm going, I think what is really fantastic here with the, sorry, I'm detouring a bit, but with the cryptoporticals is that it is a scheme which is really so thought through. I mean, we had lots of discussions in the space, like for example, the irregularities in the colonnade. Even Spinazzola, there's a drawing where I think he tried to make it more regular than it really is. But as a painter and as a practitioner, we really thought, well, it's obviously that it has to be so irregular, otherwise it would be quite boring, because it's like 60, 80 meters of the same thing happening, and you have to have a kind of really dynamic and principle and something which sort of undermines what's happening to keep it fresh, even if you're not aware of it. If you just glance at it subconsciously, you're very aware. And what the painter here did is fantastic, how he inverted, or she, whoever, the workshop, it was anyway a workshop, so they, anyway, but how they really thought about color. So in the colonnade, the sort of coupled mortem with this sienna yellow, and then in the Ercos, which unfortunately I have that just in black and white, but I have a detail here in color, where it's almost an inversion of the color from the colonnade. And then you go from there into the bathroom, and the sort of blue from the outside is introduced. Nonetheless, all the other colors suddenly become or get different roles. I'm quite interested in how color has certain roles, and they change as well. But then also just over time, how the meaning of color has changed. Like for example, with black, you find black so sumptuously within Roman wall paintings, and you rarely see it as wall decoration these days, and I think it's just really interesting to, culturally also to see what kind of significance or symbolism these colors had in different times.
For me, one of the striking things is that modern colours are very often, especially acrylic and so on, a very different chemical composition, have a very different effect. And it's rather interesting seeing the very bright colours of the modern palette next to these more subdued ones. But you're not seeing it as subdued, you're seeing it as bright.
Yeah. I do. Sorry, I think it would be great to talk about this later. I don't want to eat into Francesco.
Thank you, Andrew, very much for the question. Thank you for the lovely answer, actually, too. Thank you. Right. So, obviously, really delighted and honoured that Francesco is able to join us here in Newcastle. We have already had the privilege of spending some time with Francesco, appreciating Newcastle. Tomorrow we're out on Hadrian's Wall. But now we are going to hear about his vision for Herculaneum, a very exciting vision it is, and his reflections on the way that Herculaneum links these two themes together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, for also your passion. You must be patient because I'm not able to talk to you freely in English like Catrin, so I will read my text with my Parthenopean English accent. It will be funny, at least, if not interesting. And also, here the friends have a big challenge for me to read and to put forward. It's not easy for me. Maybe.
Would you like me to do the slides?
Maybe yes, if you can follow. Anyway. Okay, so today we are going to celebrate a collaboration born from a happy encounter between the Parco Archeologico di Ercolano and Catrin. As always, there is a moment that should be cited. And in our case, this occurred in May 2017, during the celebration of the 19th anniversary since Amedeo Maiuris began archaeological excavation. And we started speaking about what is the Parco Archeologico di Ercolano. So, according to the reform of the Ministry of Cultural Heritage and Tourism, implemented between 2014 and 2016, the Archaeological Park of Ercolano has been declared a site of national importance and has been granted both scientific and financial autonomy. Since June 2016, Ercolano has been officially detached from Pompeii, seat of another archaeological park, as you saw, comprising the other well-known Vesuvian site, in addition to Pompeii, Stabie, Oplontis, and Bosco Reale. The Ercolano Park currently, as the director that you are stand before you, try to manage the site with the support of an administrative council and a scientific committee, each comprising 4 members plus the director, who acts as chair. Its formal charter has been approved at the beginning of February 2018, and the new organization of functions have been activated. The park is organized into 3 offices: accessibility, conservation, general affairs, as well as a directorate which focuses on strategic programming. So, what is the mission of the park? What are the objectives it has set itself, and what are the projects in progress? The mission of the park is, in my view, conservation and communication of the cultural values of Ercolano, to the existing public and to the future generation. When I say cultural values, I mean both the tangible assets that constitute the archaeological heritage of the site and its intangible assets. Its intangible assets results from archaeological and historical knowledge of the ancient Roman city and from the identity that Ercolano has archived following its discovery in the social and cultural context of modern and contemporary times. This latter, you can go, okay, this latter stay. This latter aspect is no less important than the first. Indeed, it forms a unique set of evidence processing values of cultural heritage and identity. We must now introduce a new player on the stage, the Packard Humanities Institute, the PHI. In fact, since 2001, the site of Ercolano has been the subject of a project aiming to strengthening capacity building. This has come to be known as Ercolano Conservation Project, HCP. A team of specialists appointed by the PHI, mostly Italian, worked side by side the public authority staff, reinforcing the public authorities from within, and together they introduced entirely new ways of working. Campaigns of works to stabilize the slowly.
Sorry.
Thank you. Right? Another one? Okay. So, thank you. Excuse me. Campaigns of works to stabilize, the maintain and conserve the site and its urban infrastructures were accompanied by constant attention to research, documentation, excavation, and information management. All activities closely tied to precise long-term site management objectives. The collaboration was boosted by the involvement of other core partners. First, the British School at Rome, at the time when our friend here, Andrew Wallace-Hadrian, was the director, and subsequently, since 2013, by the organization Dr. David Packard created precisely for our good cause, the Istituto Packard per i Beni Culturali, based in Pisa, and a whole array of other local, national, and international research departments and cultural associations. So we can see also these activities was not just theory, but also in practice. You see at the end of the 19th and at 2006 how dramatically changed the situation, and we have many slides to show you. I could show many slides for a really dramatic situation. How tragical was the situation in 2002. Tested from the members of the UNESCO Commission. So you see there are some activities, okay, and for the social, also social involvement of the people, and the attraction for other institution like ICROM and okay. One of the major advantages of the autonomous park was to have the responsibility to make decisions and solve problems near the problems. A second advantage is represented by the fact that the park not only limits its action to the area of the archaeological site, but extend its protection and activities to even a surrounding area close by. This creates a better condition for a positive interaction with the surrounding area and communities. This is, this is the area of competence of the park. And the next, for example, this is one of the major projects that we are now almost in work to link, to re-establish a link between the ancient town and the new town, because this link was interrupted after Maiuri's retreat. Because all the people from Ercolano was also workers in this site, and this link with the new Ercolano, who don't exploited the archaeological site for touristic, for example, purpose, was interrupted. And this is a very important, one of our most important problems now. Guaranteeing conservation is neither simple nor automatic. Above all, it is necessary to understand in detail the assets to be conserved. In this area, the HCP experience is a wealth of knowledge and expertise that progressively attracted contributors of other national and international organizations we tested before. All the material and documentation produced has been continuously recorded in HCP Geographic Information System. Now it's the HCP of the Archaeological Park, sure. That was launched in 2008 based on a new general site plan, at a scale of 1 to 15, which is continuously updated and enriching. Inserted into the same system are plans relating to conservation and monitoring and analysis of decay. This is one of the examples, which is a fundamental importance when identifying the correct strategy for conservation interventions. By 2013, HCP had in fact established the general safety of roofs, walls, decorated surfaces at risk, and a system for dealing with the rainwater across the entire site with very few exceptions. HCP specialists worked with the superintendent's staff to shift the attention more and more to long-term conservation and maintenance programs. The HCP strategy that I found when I became director follows the precise lines of shared proactive, not reactive planning for protection, conservation, and access. Their approach developed specially to be viable for the public partner to take forward along the day when HCP finishes. Never want to see this day, but now we are acting an innovative contractual approach for a 3-year back-to-back cycles of programmed routine maintenance and periodic repairs across macro areas of the site. These are worth approximately approximately 4 million euros a cycle. These are complemented by more concentrated conservation and enhancement initiative for the more needy areas of the site. Current projects of this type, many of which have been planned by HCP, are due to go on site soon and have a total value of 12 million euros. As for the enhancement, the park has adopted an approach. An approach focuses on the visitor with the aim of not only of welcoming them in the best way, but of caring for them, involving them in our activities, listening the needs and including the visitors and all those interested in defining the cultural values that form the living and shared identity of the place. In this way, various activities have been realized, characterized by the desire to explore new ways to communicate the cultural values of the park. One of the activities I would like to talk about is the event Spa Erco, dedicated to the female ward and set in the women's sections of the central bath. Here, on the occasion of the Women's Day, activities evoked through about ancient Roman women in the bath, to bring back a suggestion of the splendor of past everyday life that took place in that place. On the benches and seats of the bath, faithful copies of the object of Roman female toiletry were placed, taken from digitally printed 3D reliefs. And pieces of literature and poems in Italian and English translation dating back to the Roman times and closely related to the thermal bath, environmental, or to the exhibits. No caption were presented on site, and the connection between literary text and object were entrusted to the interpretation of each individual visitors. To complete the installation, there were tablets hidden in the walls cavity that reproduced the sound of water that flowed in abundance in this place. Perfumed essences and machine to produce steam, like those used in discos, and a bed, and the beautiful bed of rose petals on the bottom of the Caldarium pool completed the setting. Simultaneously, on the Facebook page of the park, the traditional forum provides scientific information to people who might wish to deepen their knowledge and also to attract the public who were not present on the site. Therefore, it is exactly the theme of adapting the park to several different languages and of attracting the non-public that led us to the topic of this conversation, of this today conversation. As I had the opportunity to state to Catrin in our first meeting, I do not believe that the archaeological site should host the contemporary art exhibitions. In fact, for this purpose, galleries are certainly more comfortable and better organized to accommodate the needs of an artist. On the other hand, I'm deeply convinced of the importance of contemporary art as an expression and interpretation of local genius in non-traditional and very original ways, unique to the style of each artist. In other words, it is about sharing a creative journey and communication, starting off a process of involvement that is wide as possible, characterized in particular by the freedom from the disciplinary restriction of historical archaeological science. To my great satisfaction, I have to say that this is exactly what we have managed to achieve. However, before finishing by telling you more about my perspective on the project Expanded Interiors, we need to get to know one of the protagonists of the history of modern Ercolano, Amedeo Maiuri, to understand how important this anniversary was, which I mentioned at the beginning of this speech. The Greek archaeologist said, Ercolano must be considered as a city and not as a gold mine of artworks. This statement sums up concisely the entire history of research at Ercolano, from treasure trove to archaeological context. Amedeo Maiuri was the first and the only person who materially realized the dream of seeing the city excavated as a wall, starting from the 18th century discoveries. After the failed attempts promoted by great figures such as Giuseppe Fiorelli, the father of Italian public archaeology, and then latterly by Sir Charles Wolsten between 1904 and 1907, the dream of unearthing Ercolano was only realized many years later, however, 1927, thanks to the effort and design of this one man, Amedeo Maiuri, who had tapped into the fascist government interest in Roman archaeologies as a means of propaganda, and was able to present the role of a man in sole command, has also been part of the mythology of the regime. Also, the figures of Maiuri has been a very controversial one, and not without good reason, at very least given his apparent support for fascism. One cannot help but recognize his achievement in restoring Ercolano to its urban form. Also, the fully excavated area was approximately a third of the 15 hectares believed to comprise the entire city. Maiuri's extraordinary feat is represented by the overall consistent results catered by the site on completion of more than 30 years of activities, from 1927 to 1961. The work of excavation, restoration, and organization of the sectors that were progressively completed and then opened to the public view were carried out according to a detailed project that built of the more developed research from both the 18th and the 19th century. Nevertheless, during the course of this work, he found himself having to confront unexpected challenges of immense complexity that he tackled using solutions that he found on site, taking advantage of the great traditional skills, practice, and techniques of his workers. What lacked almost completely were the excavation records, reduced to the diary entries accompanied by photos and a few observations, and the studies, assessment, and surveys relating to the various solutions that were adopted. Some of these solutions were long-lasting and particularly fitting. Some other, even if innovative, have not held up to the passing of time. Also because the genuine spirit of innovation, research, and interpretation that characterized the first decades of the 20th century saw no follow through the 1960s onwards. The presentation of the site was not limited only to the restoration of the gardens, to the invitation to appreciate the extraordinary state of conservation of the upper levels by way of the system of a series of vertical planes that created a sort of gigantic axonometric cross-section, but it extended also to the relocation in situ of hundreds of artifacts protected in cases or even in actual display cabinets like those in a museum, or displayed encased in arrangement that evoked their original use in certain place. Indeed, it is at Ercolano that Maiuri successfully achieved this idea of a museum city, an open-air museum going as far as to display around 1,900 finds through the archaeological area. In this context, I must bring attention, your attention to the fantastic volume edited by Domenico Camardo and Marino Tomista. We had the honor to launch in an event on site at 1st December 2013 17 and wall dedicated to the Maiuri Ercolano, Ercolano 1927, l'impresa archeologica di Amedeo Maiuri. In any event, Maiuri's work at Herculaneum was so pervasive and structured that even today, whoever tackles the issues of restoration, analysis, and communicating the values of the archaeological site must first and foremost contended with the Maiuri's period. What happened follows Maiuri's retirement into private life is such recent history that even today it is perhaps premature to pass judgment historically. However, this is another story. In 2070s, to remember the beginning of the Maiuri excavation, we have chosen, with the support of the HCP, to celebrate the teaching of this genius of Italian archaeologists without looking back, but drawing inspiration from his teaching and looking forward. The program, which was extended until the beginning of 2019, was carried out according to three axes. The first, historical archaeological activities, with a day dedicated to the discussion of the Maiuri experiences and to the presentation of the volume already mentioned. Point two, thematic project within the archaeological area to allow for the rediscovery of the exceptional impact Maiuris had on the site. Each project had a small exhibition that, in some ways, recall the project of the City Museum. We call these mini exhibition Maiuris pop-up because they were similar to the windows that open on a modern computer. One of these was set up of the Bottega del Plumbarius on the Decumanus Maximus as part of the shopping project, who have also a lifelet to accompany the public. A second was the idealized recreation of Maiuri study. Other included the presentation of the tools used for the inaugural excavations and discoveries offered to the King of Italy on 22 May 1927. As part of the Scavare project and the presentation of the Messenius Enormous Bakery. The third point was the dialogue with the contemporary artists to reinterpret the creative aspect and, I would say, demiurgic works of Maiuri. Artists who participate are Michele Iodice with the installation dedicated to the theme of memory and the red thread running through the excavation, and Catrin Huber with the installation expanded interiors. While point one was addressed to the audience of scholars and enthusiasts, the next two activities were offered free to all visitors and were united by the fact that they were not simple events, but rather dynamic and participatory process, with less than almost a year, and which saw the conclusion of the public, the inclusion of the public, site guides, various stakeholders, local schools, and also the Academy of Fine Arts of Naples, the Accademia di Belle Arti. To rebuild the Plumbarius workshop, in the weeks before the event, the HCP colleagues held a dialogue with the visitors by directly testing the Maiuri presentation integration project with them. In the following month, in collaboration with the high school students participating in the Alternanza Scuola Lavoro project, we studied and mapped the flows of tourists. No, this is the participatory new project, okay? And this is we studied the flow of tourists and their behavior around the area of the shop. Furthermore, the park has made an agreement with a historic foundry in Nola, which, through a sponsorship, okay, has made bronze copies of the two most precious and delicate things that were once exhibited there: a statue of Dionysus with panther and a candlestick and its own advertising scene for the ancient craftsmen who worked here repairing objects and metal tools. Once again, the student of the Faculty of Architecture who scanned in the same workshop the statues to be reproduced were involved with the scenes of assistance of the HCP to carry out the 3D model. Then, when the copies were in an advanced state, taking advantage of the large audience of one of the three first Sundays, the artisans of Nola illustrated their technique for reproducing and refining the copies of the precious instruments. Finally, the shop has got back all its original equipment and it's now visible to all. In this case, in our present case, the balance and the intelligence of Catrin and the generosity of all your team, and I wish to say thank you really to all the team who worked with Catrin, have literally embraced the site, public and staff working there. Catrin immediately grasped the message we wanted to convey and inserted it into our original artistic research path, as we heard before. Catrin, participation and involvement have accompanied this process since the beginning, with the realization of 20 surveys and copies of some objects kept in deposit that were of interest to Catrin, but we saw all these things. At the end of the journey, on the day of the opening of expanded interiors, in the premises of the modern tickets office, an anonymous and unwelcoming space, Catrin's lessons was put into practice by the students of the Academy of Fine Arts, who in turn led the primary school children of Ercolano to use the walls of the building as a frame on which to paint their own idea of space and of Maiuri. Finally, to re-establish the historical relationship between Maiuri and the citizens of Ercolano, many of which were workers and maintenance workers in the Maiuri company, the park granted 2 days of free admission to encourage the reappropriation of the site by modern citizens of Ercolano. So, to conclude, I'm here to witness an international experiences that has proved, in fact, and with very few words, how it's possible to combine conservation, communication, presentation, and of archaeological site and artistic creation. Thank you.
Can I ask if there are some observations or points people would like to draw forward before we move into plenary on that? I was particularly taken by the community engagement that is coming through all the way along. How far have you found members of the local community also driving some of the ideas that you're then developing on the site? You've obviously created a lot of ideas and attracted members of the community into those, but how far are the local community also offering ideas for that?
This is the next step. We have now, in fact, in Ercolano, this cooperativa Siani against the mafia, and this cooperativa is very proactive in order for the managing of the social media, for example, and also now we will solicit the modern society, the modern citizenship to give to us new ideas, both to manage, for example, a garden, a beautiful garden, the Parco Maiuri, and this garden is closed because we haven't enough gardens, and we want to launch a proposition to the local communities to take care of these activities to give life to this garden. In that way, to reopen, for example, as one of the main activities.
Super. It's a very, very exciting idea. Been working already extensively at mapping contemporary art in the heritage experience, and I was just wondering, really, Judith, when you look at the things that have been brought out here, how far do they resonate with your own experience of contemporary practice in the UK? Are there a lot of similar strands being explored? Are there notably different angles in the two areas?
I should point out that half of my working week is with the research team who are here as well.
Yes.
The other half, I am our creative director of an agency that has been bringing contemporary art practice into museums and heritage sites. I've been working in this area for quite some time. One of the things that struck me immediately was the sort of brave decision that Herculaneum took at putting a contemporary artist in their site, because it's notoriously very difficult to elicit those the agreement to do that for the first one. So I mean, I think it's a very brave decision to do that. I know how difficult it is negotiating with those sites as to the challenges that working in very delicate archaeological sites presents. So Catrin must have worked very hard with the site and establishing a good relationship, I would say, to make that happen. So I just want to say one thing, because we may have run out of time, but it struck me that your question to Catrin about colour in her work brought out something very particular about why you should use an artist actually in these sites, is that she actually became very animated and made a connection with the painter, the original painter, the wall painter, as a human being. And I think that's what bringing artists into these sites does. It connects with the human sort of experience, and you did that without thinking. And you brought that together, and you talked about paint in a very exciting way that the original artist of the wall paintings must have done. So I think that's very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a brave decision is, I think, the way in which people respond to heritage environments. They can be very heavily invested in heritage environments, and therefore they can react very strongly for and against things that they see as intrusive to those environments. But of course, they can also be a tremendous instrument for illuminating and deepening the experience of those environments too. And I think that what comes across very nicely from our discussion so far. Mike, you are responsible for one of our greatest World Heritage sites. What are the sorts of things that you're going to be most concerned about when, for example, a proposal to look at a new art installation is presented? And of course you've had that experience on Hadrian's wall already. What sorts of considerations does one have to look at there?
I mean, I think You start at that point where it's to do no harm. You are, as you say, sometimes it does become a challenging responsibility. You are responsible for passing this site on in as good, if not better, condition than it was when you started in your work. But I suppose what we've changed in the last sort of 10, 15 years in my professional career is we've moved significantly away from that sort of Lord Reithian thing of the archaeological site. I'm very interested in it. Well, I'm an archaeological nerd, so I'm going to be interested in it. And if you're not interested in it, well, you know, that's really your fault. To a much more modern position where, you know, not only is it a necessity, but as was brought out, you know, very nicely in both presentations, the other ways of interpreting the site, rather than sort of, you know, pure archaeological reconstruction or a traditional sort of interpretation scheme, you know, valid and important though they are to the site, that ability to engage a different audience, and in fact engage an audience in a you know, in some ways a sort of deeper, more visceral kind of way, the sort of connection with people rather than just objects. I think, you know, there's obviously a balance there, but I found that quite you know, quite exciting, and it's been a really interesting period. You know, my professional career on Hadrian's Wall has been 15 years of change of in that way to be a lot more receptive to I suppose a more contemporary way of interpreting sites alongside, you know, the more traditional kind of things.
Thank you very much. And if I could move now to Lindsay, you're someone who's been both archaeologist and of course involved in commissioning of and the setting up through the Hadrian Art Trust of art installations per linea and Valley on the line of the wall, and I was just wondering how that relationship in those two different aspects of your career and interests has worked, how it's fallen together.
I think commissioning is a slightly overstated word for what we did. On the whole, it was a load of fun, friends having good fun. We tended to be very much involved in trying to get the community. We weren't putting things on Hadrian's Wall to get more visitors or anything like that. It was for the people who were already there. And on the whole, what we were trying to do, I think, was for people to say, oh, to give them a new insight into something. And on the whole, do you remember us ever using paint? I don't think we ever did. We did just about every other sort of art, but I don't think we ever had paint. But it was really to make people appreciate all the five senses whilst they're on a site. And I don't think anybody who was ever there will forget the performance on a hang. For those of you who don't know, a hang is a musical instrument like two battered woks stuck together, and it makes the most extraordinary sound. And we had a man playing the hang in the bathhouse at Chester's, and the sound of the hang with the sound of the trees and the birds and the river, and every now and again tourists would arrive and they would go, ooh. They weren't quite sure what to do, but none of them left.
Yes.
They all stayed for the bitter end, and I think that was what it was all about. And the Mile Castle of books,
yes,
again, made people really stop and think, oh, wasn't expecting that. And I think that's what it's about, is to just slightly, perhaps even the people who are the site nerds, to give them something. And there were quite a few site nerds when it came to the Mile Castle of books, quite a few of them. Just to give them a sort of second view of, oh, that's not what we were expecting, and to perhaps make them think twice of what it is they were going to see.
Thank you. And Lindsay, you were drawing also there on the theme of engagement and community. If I could turn now to Iain, your organisation, TWAM, actually has galleries, it has museums, it has archaeological sites. So you span all of these three areas. We've been fortunate today with Francesco to see both the Hatton, of course, which is part of TWAM, spend time at the Great North Museum. When it comes to this pattern of larger community engagement and contemporary art and those three venues, what sort of different lessons do they have to teach us about how communities engage with them and with art?
I think it's really interesting. Some of the points I think that Mike was picking up about that version of interpretation that spans from really to go back further to the Enlightenment, that very rational version. I was really thinking, as Catrin in particular was talking, about the difference between interpretation and intervention. I go back to some of my very early career. I started working in museums as a learning officer, taking school groups around archaeological sites. And one of the questions that kids would ask you is, why did the Romans live in buildings that were only so high? Because most British archaeology is about knee-high. Now, that's a very reasonable question if you're a 7-year-old coming on a school visit. And obviously we now have amazing technology that allows you to put on a headset and fly through things. And we have a lot of research and information that can tell us a lot of things. But actually, it's equally exciting to go off into the imagined space. And I was taken, as you were talking, Catrin, I was thinking of the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul, Orhan Pamuk's amazing fictitious museum, which he then translated into a 3D reality, and how that makes us think about ourselves, how we interact, the things that we do and don't know about the past. And certainly in terms of when we work with communities, we always start not from the resource that we've got, but what is the need of the community. So where is the community coming from? So again, I think that's where contemporary art can really come into that and be a way of exploring with people. So a completely different example, but a story I was told today by somebody working in the health service in a cultural context was about working with a group of people who had lost their sense of smell and of taste. So a clinical workshop that discussed some of the clinical symptoms of that, but the end point of the day was artists working with them for them to actually paint their experience. Some people who had a sense of it and had lost it, and some people had never had a sense of it to explore it. So, to me, the intervention of contemporary artists working in the space is to take us into those spaces that we don't get to if we stick to the very obvious and the rational. And again, when I was thinking about colour, I was taken to, if anybody's seen the sort of recent Ashurbanipal exhibition at the British Museum, where where the colour of prehistory, pre-proto-history was returned to Syrian stone tablets that carve the history of that period of the world with incredible digital technology. That is fantastic in a very sort of rational way, but it doesn't take you in the same way to some of those imagined spaces that are created when a contemporary artist is working in space. And I think we also have to be aware of the different needs, the different learning styles of audiences. Some people will want to do that reading, and then the contemporary artist brings us into a space where other people will react, as we've heard, in that very visceral and emotional way. So that's absolutely part of the intervention, is part of the armoury of tools that we have.
Thank you. The point about the intervention brings us also back, I think, very much to Judith's observation about the artist in that space, and drawing in turn on Catrin's a Roman wall painter in your presentation. Can I ask if we have any themes that colleagues would like to explore there? We've talked about issues of participation and challenges that confront us for the future. Yes, please.
You sort of haven't directly touched on this, but I was interested to know about what was the experience of people coming to Herculaneum, not the people who engaged the local community who were sort of brought in on different activities and workshops, but the sort of general tourist, international tourist visitor. What was their reaction and response to those, seeing the contemporary painting alongside those archaeological spaces?
Well, we did some feedback questionnaires to kind of gauge that, and you got a whole spectrum of people who kind of got really interested and intrigued, but you also got the people who slightly ignored it, which was kind of really interesting. But it was also fantastic to just talk to the invigilators, and that was actually really enlightening, because they said that they had a lot of conversations about the piece, and that the people were really drawn into it. And so I think you get the whole spectrum, and you get people questioning it, why art here? Well, I'd rather just see the wall paintings. But you get also the opposite, that people really say, oh, this has totally changed my engagement with the site. And yeah, I think maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think the challenge is to get people to spend time with the work. So I think if people spend time with the work, they really engage with it.
Do you think that's different in an art gallery context, where obviously that you're there to spend time with the painting, and you might do different things, but that's a difficult site. I imagine people are it's quite a big site, you're trying to move through, you're moving through it in a different way.
Yeah, I think it is different. And in that way, I think it was interesting, because it was also like something which interrupted, it's something which interrupts walking around. And I think I'm quite interested in as intervention as well as a provocation of the audience to engage. And we didn't actually provide that much contextual information, so we really wanted that the viewer had to engage with what they saw and to put it together. Yeah.
I was going to add something to that. I have a friend who's a philosopher who I asked about some of these questions, and he came up with a model where he described museums as being zoos, because the stuff in them is put there in cages or cases, and it's not supposed to be there, and art galleries as safari parks, because it was a more natural environment for the others. I don't think the analogy carried through perfectly, but it was something that we had quite fun discussing over dinner one night.
Yeah, but I was so, I'm jumping in. But I mean, as I said earlier, I thought it was really privileged working there, and it is this kind of working within these different time zones, and it questions, you question the object, but you question also what does it mean to be an artwork, to be in this site and working with kind of, if copies, but with these sort of original objects, and it's just such an interesting entanglement of times, which, it's quite a privilege to work with.
Andrew's going to come in.
I wanted to go back to your wonderful observation about the courage of the authorities who allowed this to happen in their sites. And I wanted to take the opportunity to pay a bit of tribute to the current authorities. I think Catrin was very lucky to arrive at the moment. We're missing Massimo Ozana here.
Yeah.
When both Pompeii and Herculaneum had a new generation of people in charge. I worked for years and years with Piero Buzzo, and I have all the respect in the world for dear Piero. We would have never done this project in Herculaneum without his courage. And yet, he was incredibly old-fashioned and sticky and suspicious of novelty. He hated television cameras on site. He particularly hated the idea of anyone dressing up as a Roman on site. One has some sympathy. The idea of doing this under Piero, it would have been an uphill struggle to convince him. And in a way, back then, I think of the authorities, the Italian authorities back then of the 90s, as still a rather beleaguered generation. They had to fight very hard, mostly with their own state, to protect their sites. It required incredible acts of courage to keep on the straight and narrow, to insist on the importance of what they were doing. And I was very struck that Francesco gave us the first translation that I have seen into English of the words tutela e valorizzazione. The first good one I've ever seen of the preservation and transmission of cultural values. That's is this an official translation or is it your genius? I don't know. But it's a beautiful it's a beautiful way of putting it. But because back then in the days of battle, the politicians saw valorizzazione as the extraction of financial profit from sites. And therefore, those responsible for the sites were doing battle against valorizzazione because it was a real threat that it would be reduced to some sort of archaeological Disneyland. Okay? And we've now got a different concept of what valorizzazione might be about. This transmission of cultural value, where you have to discover, well, what is the cultural value of this site? You have to talk to people, you have to understand the visitors, and you have to listen to artists who give their take on, this is what I think the cultural value of your site. And it's so exciting, and it just opens up a new set of possibilities. The involvement of the local community is tremendously important. One of Francesco's predecessors, Maria Parco de Valdi, who again, a person for whom I had enormous respect, regarded everything beyond the walls of the site as sort of enemy territory. She hated it. She said, they just throw things at us. It's true, they do. The local kids just chuck things down on the site below. She complained that the police weren't doing their business to protect the site, but it was seen as a hostile environment. It's so important to see it as a friendly environment, an environment to which the site belongs. And that way you can discover what its cultural values actually are and begin to transmit them. So complimenti.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I think that also touches very powerfully on the other facet of the sustainability of sites. One needs a community to support these sites, clearly, rather than being seen as an entity besieging them and threatening their future. One term that came to me while we were looking again at both Catrin's work and Francesco's presentation was the question of authenticity. And I think it's something that's very interesting here. It comes through in several different ways. One is there is something profoundly authentic about having access to a new creative process in that environment. But people are also seeking certain types of authenticity from the past. And in different ways, both of you also referred to another authenticity issue, which was the creation of models for different purposes. And I was wondering how you found those different forms of authenticity worked for different viewers. How far do you find people responding well to them? How far do you find some of them actually colliding with others?
These issues, the authenticity in Ercolano, as you saw, we must to regard in a very relative way, because there is also the masterwork, Manuris work, no? Ercolano is a big resource. And also with the authenticity, there is a very technical expression, is the materia archeologica. So this material evidence, and we have to keep the most, the best way, this materia archeologica. And when the public come, many times in Ercolano, you know, for many reasons, for example, we don't put until now, because we don't find a proper way, the passerelle, no? Upper to the mosaic, and the people, our visitors come and say, beautiful mosaic, but how you allow us to work on these mosaics? It's precious, no. And we know why. For us, it's better to allow the people to pass with the actual numbers of tourists, instead to create sure damage with the passengers who have to give poison. No? You have the charge, the weight in somewhere. And so the maintenance, our program of maintenance for me is also a key to understand how to preserve this authenticity. For me, it's not a totem. It's one of my mission, but not like a totem. We have to have in mind that these things in few millennia, sure, will be destroyed. And if the consumption of this material evidence is a consumption to pass, to spend some cultural values, is a risk that I want to run.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, our authenticity in relation to replicas is, of course, a very different issue. I was really interested in using 3D printing to actually really dislodge the object out of its context and to really see what happens if you work with repetition and having more than one of these objects as a means of almost an iconoclastic approach, but not in a negative way, but actually in a way that I think the originals are so powerful that as an artist, I mean, it's like you. Sorry, now I ran into a one-way road, but that it's far more interesting to explore what the copies do and how you work with the copies in relationship, like with the installation of the Casa del Retiro, also that kind of tension between 2D reproduction and 3D reproduction. And I kind of feel that the eruption of Vesuvius kind of launched an iconoclastic attack on these objects. And then the sort of reproducing them is in one way a kind of an act of care, but it's also an act of destruction. And I'm just really interesting, what does it do to these figures? And I mean, it was all about dislodging them of context, reassembling them, and yeah, to see what happens. So the authenticity wasn't really that important for me in relationship to replicas and objects.
Yes, I think that issue about context, dislodging things in context, is very interesting because, of course, so many people come to Herculaneum, come to Pompeii with this imagined view that they'll find everything as it was on the moment of eruption. Of course, that's clearly not the case. And the capacity to further dwell on the way in which context is disrupted is another way of getting people to think about the environment they're in, another way of getting them to think about the engagement with that environment, and to reflect more deeply on the objects and on the spaces.
Actually, Iain,
Yeah, please.
We've spoken about the impact the art has on the visitor, but I think also I've noticed over the years that there is also impact on the staff on the site, because it takes them out of their usual run of things, and they can get quite excited about having an art installation or poetry or whatever it is on the site. It also does pull in the local community, because once they've seen Housesteads, as far as they're concerned, they've seen Housesteads, so if there's something interesting going on there, they will go back, so that does have a benefit for the site itself. But it also has an impact on the artist. And certainly when Ruth Barker was artist in residence, Leverhulme artist in residence at the Museum of Antiquities, she was a performance artist. But as she spent her year with me, and she was sitting in my lectures with students with artifacts, she began to get very twitchy about the fact her art was very ephemeral. It would move on and it wouldn't leave any record behind. And yet there was Hadrian's Wall with all these inscriptions and a record for thousands of years. And actually she did change her practice quite considerably. In fact, she ended up doing a PhD here, didn't she?
She did, yes, she was my student.
Yes, so I think the impact on the artist, I've noticed over the years that artists, once they've done something like that, it inspires them and energizes them, but they do often change tack very often and start to explore other media.
Yes. Thank you. we're lucky to have quite a number of artists here. Does that resonate with colleagues' experiences here as well?
I think I do a lot of work in heritage sites, and I think we've had conversations about how, of course, the sites are inspirational. You know, you're responding to site, that's your inspiration.
Yes.
And it's always kind of a privilege when people let you in, let you see behind the scenes. And also, it's not just the site, it's the people working there, I find very often. But also, it's the idea that you're working with a different audience. A gallery is a completely, you're absolutely right, it's not a gallery. And it is not a gallery audience. So the kind of people that you're envisaging making work for is not other artists. And it is not the art world. It's for a set of people who are coming in to look at art in a completely different context. And I've always been really excited by that potential. I don't want to talk to other artists, and I don't want to particularly talk to the art world. I want to talk to communities and other people, and it gives you that opportunity to do that. And it's an amazing opportunity. I just wondered whether, you know, we talked about how amazing it is. So, is this going to continue? Is there going to be more artworks in Herculaneum and Pompeii?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the right answer.
No, now we will open a phase of listing. So we want to list the abroad worlds, not only the people who live there, but also the people who live outside. And for us, the important is to share a process, to share a program, to have this a relationship between your research and our research, and to go forward, to looking forward for something new, to understand, to better understand site in another way. I'm fascinated from the contemporary art because it's another way without all the restriction that we have in archaeology, and now we are so specialized in archaeology. So we are deeper and deeper and deeper, but a general vision is difficult to have, and artists give you a general vision. Even with this impact, I was impressed from the observation, Andrew's observation about the colors, because the colors have really have this energy, you know. They're going on our eyes and solicit our eyes in a particular way. So also one of the exploration could be these colors, the new color, your color is new actually, and the color, the Roman colors is not the Roman colors, it's the Roman colors after a process of decay and of a conservation works. So, which kind of solicitation of our feeling, the feeling, we feel the colors without spinning, without explication, and we know from some literary sources that some colors was intended from the Roman artist to have some effects. For example, Vitruvius said where you have some walls in azzurro or in other colors. So in order to give a more peaceful environment. We must have more courage to explore these contacts. And we must be lucky to find somebody like Catrin, people who are interested to dialogue.
I would strongly recommend you look at poets and musicians as well, because the one thing about archaeological sites is the acoustics are so different to a concert hall that you'll find they get very excited as well.
It's not an easy area to work in, bringing artists together with the heritage, and it does require a relationship to develop. And I think, you know, now it's been done and it's demonstrated that it's done, you know, it's done well and it's a benefit. That's the legacy will go forward, but it's not an easy area, and it does require a trust on both sides of the fence, to trust each other's professionalism and to trust each other's camp, if you like, as to, you know, the care that the heritage sector has for its collections, but also the freshness that working with an artist can bring to showing history in a different way for an audience, as Irene says, a wide audience out there, and it does require a relationship and a trust.
Francesco, can I ask, how much is your experience unique in Italy, or how easily do you think your positive experience will translate into other archaeological sites or other heritage sites in Italy?
I think an experience like this with Catrin is quite unique in Italy, because the experience that I know is the exhibition of works designed for other contexts, or works on site designed but applied from genius like Pistoletto, no? The 3 degree of these works, no? Come si chiama? 3 degree of something is adapted from Pistoletto for each site with different circle. He draw 3 circles with different materials, and the materials is take the materials from the site. I saw it at Temple di Caracalla, and then in Pompeii, and I don't know, sure at Campo dei Miracoli at Pisa, many sites. But without dialogue is also interesting, because it's a interpretation personal, very personal, for big personality, like the book of Andrew about Ercolano. Ercolano is the lecture of Andrew. Or when we was young, the books for history of art was the history of art according to somebody. I think in England you have the same. So it's very, yes. But like this, I don't know if there is some with the same way. Maybe yes.
Yeah. So I just have. I'm just interested in what the kind of next phase of the dialogue is, because there's something very interesting about occupying the art world, or occupying the world of heritage, which is where I sit, in that they're very privileged spaces to sit in. As practitioners, as interpreters, as people who engage as specialists, subject specialists. And the art we've seen is amazing, and it opens up that dialogue with visitors. But I wonder whether the next stage is actually not the partnership, it's the triumvirate, about whether collaboration with the community would inspire artwork rather than just going into a dialogue with the community. So I'm just interested to know whether the work might move in that direction, because there's a difference between working with, so I was really, the piece the young people had produced I thought was amazing, where they got to express themselves, but actually the young people working with an artist to produce a collaborative piece of work in that space, for them to bring their voice in where they don't necessarily have the language either of art or heritage, and how that feeds into that process.
Is that a question to me, or?
Anyone.
Well, I must say that for me the work was also really very much in dialogue with the site, with the houses and the work there. I was really interested in the practice. So whilst of course the dialogue with the audience is important, I was actually really, I mean, why I wanted to do it. I wanted to understand more about this, and also then engage the audience with the process. But I'm not
as such a participatory artist. I think
it's not necessarily for you to do.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in maybe where it goes next to Herculaneum in terms of engaging that community with a collaborative artist and actually shifting the dialogue on to the next.
The point that we have different point of view. Sure, we have to manage with the public and to our issues is to capture the non-public. For us, for example, the non-public now is the young between 20 and 30 years. He never come to a museum, and I don't know in England, but to us it's a very big problem because our museum is boring.
Yes.
Yeah, so
It's boring. It's a museum not on measure for young people, and we don't listen to what the young people expect to find in a museum. And so it's a process. I haven't a solution. We have to try to find some way with some peculiar stakeholders. For example, in the last 2 years we have worked with the agers, the Instagrammers, people who go some digital invasion on the site, and there was some interpretation by photographs of the site. So, and without any expectation, free. What you want to photograph, you will do. And for the next autumn, for the next, no, l'autunno, come si dice, autunno, scusate, autumns, and we are programming a way to involve these young people, starting with the help of the people from Accademia di Belle Arti, but to involve the people around, the young people, asking to the people to give to us our own vision of, I don't know, our exhibition about gold things or other things. But we must have also the courage to go one step behind and to give to the people, okay, this is the Ferrari, now you can drive the Ferrari. I sold the Ferrari and you drive. And you go where you want.
Very good point about making as well, which I think is really important. And Catrin, your exhibition obviously included making of objects, and you know we've got a project happening here in Newcastle Gateshead called City of Dreams, which is about aiming to work with the 170,000 young people in Newcastle and Gateshead every year to give them a cultural experience over the next 10 years. And we've done a consultation of about 1,200 young people as part of that. And the thing that came back they really want to do is making, whatever that is, whether that's making a painting, making a poem, making a museum exhibition, making a film, it doesn't matter, but making is tremendously important.
And what we found really wonderful in the workshops was because we restricted the number to 10, and we had day-long workshops. It was really intense with site visit and storerooms, and then we sat around the table and we made, and it gave a really fantastic opportunity also to talk about all the things, to have feedback, to talk about the process, the exhibitions, the objects. It was called as actually mischievous objects. So
I want to tell you an experience. I'm sorry again for my English, but it's interesting. In 2014, I was responsible of this little museum in Capua. Capua was the capital of Campania, but now a little museum, archaeological museum, and we constructed an exhibition with 7 statues from Roman period, because we have to open the Roman area, but we haven't enough money to. So this exhibition was very peculiar, very poor art. So some table in a very rude wood. Out of the table, our instrument, like archaeologists, to understand these statues. So photographs or some note, comparison, no? And the work, I don't know, a trapezophorus, statues. And after all this installation, I called some young people from the area. is a club of musicians and artists. And I said, okay, this is the, and so organize yourself what you want to do there. This exhibition was inside the storerooms with the 7 guardians who discreetly control the people. But all the people was allowed to touch, because we have in Santa Maria, I don't know, millions of unguentari. Why don't touch these things? It's a museum without public, with very few public, so for us it's so come and touch, participate, do what you want. And these young people invented, there was a status of Venus, and invented body painting on the with some models completely nude, and on some part your hand, my hand, was fantastic. And also a creative photographs, creative text. Some composition, some people, now I remember, some people had some composition.
Yeah.
Was an unbelievable experience, and with how powerful is the younger people. When we have this, we tend to leave these people aside, because they don't know, we are responsible, there is the law, and so and so. But when we arrange the things in that way, and we can do something, the result is unbelievable.
So I can bear witness to Francesco's success in community engagement, because I didn't see that, but I saw, of course, the cafe that he had. He had to make a new ticket office, so he thought he'd make a cafe while he was about it. And it has become the go-to place in Santa Maria di Capua.
Yes.
That all the young people just hang out in his ticket office.
now, if you go in Santa Maria and you ask to some people, where is the amphitheater? All the young people say you where it is, because he will go there to spend the afternoon or the summer night. It's good, it's a beautiful place.
And I think you've got the same challenge.
And a very good pizza. You can eat a very good pizza. Biological. Biological.
You have the same challenge and opportunity with Ercolano. And the many artists I've taken around, they always respond to the antiquities, but they also respond to the modern town. And what's so exciting about the modern town is, in a sense, it's poverty. In a sense, the extraordinary contrast with the richness of antiquity, and especially the Pugliano market, where people are selling second-hand clothes and so on. And artists that I've taken there always love that. And I think, I've always thought that if you can bring together these extraordinarily different experiences, people should understand the modern town too. They should understand what living with the Camorra needs. You spoke about Radio Siziani, who are an amazingly courageous group of young people who just tell other young people how to live properly, how not to be ground down by all that. And I think that an ancient site has an important social purpose too, in raising the aspirations of a whole area.
And also, you know, this is true, but there is also something who linked Ercolano, the ancient city, and the modern contemporary people, is the resilience. There is a capacity to resilience in this place, where we have volcanoes, Camorra, the bomb of the Second Mondial Wars, as in England, sure. Each time, after such terrible tragedy, catastrophic events, the people come back again and reconstruct maybe with nothing, like this free market of Giuliano. Now we used to say economia circolare, no? Circular economy, economia circolare. But with the poor things, he reconstruct an economy after the Second World War. Now it's a little old-fashioned, this flea market, but in the big period, in the flourishing period, was a way to make economy, to make money, to give the money to town. So this resilience is one of the things that I think we must work about up this theme, these issues. Capacity to come back, to insist.
That is a very positive note, along with the talk of trust and courage, both essential to the success of the artistic enterprises, the archaeological journeys that we've had explored this evening. So I'd like to say a very big thank you to Catrin for putting all this in train and for thinking of the symposium. To Francesco to coming and joining us at this particular time in Britain's exciting history. And to thank our panelists for bringing their expert perspectives to what's a fascinating and ongoing discussion, and thank you for being here and for your comments. There are some drinks, I believe, and very happy for the conversations to continue there. Thank you all so very much.